بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Who would like to go to paradise? Of course, everybody wants to go to Jannah. Yeah. طيب. Then next question is, if you were told that you could go there easily, right? Would you prefer that, to be able to go easily? Again, yeah, of course. Everybody go to paradise easily, right? You said he wants the hard way. MashaAllah. Khalas. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentions exactly how to do that. In a hadith wherein he says that man salaka tariqan yaltamisu fihi ilman sahhala Allahu lahu tariqan ila al-jannah, that whoever treads a path, and whoever starts and gets on, they put on their shoes, they put on their hijab, they get on their qamis, they get ready, they prepare themselves, right? They get dressed and they step out their door. And the reason why they got ready, the reason why they stepped out, was to learn their deen and to learn their religion. The reason that they got in the car, the reason why they hopped on the bus, the reason why they caught the cab or the Uber, the reason why they stepped into the masjid, the reason why they sat down, the reason why they opened the book, the reason why they were researching, discussing, talking. Salaka tariqan yaltamisu fihi ilman. And however they found themselves on that path, however they treaded that path, whatever they did, right, to be on that path. And the reason why they were doing it was to seek sacred knowledge. Sahhalallahu lahu tariqan ilayhi. And then the natural next step to practice and implement what you learn, that is the way to paradise. Not because there won't be any challenges, right? Not because there won't be any pitfalls, not because there won't be any detours that that come on the path, but because you're seeking knowledge. When a pitfall comes, you know exactly what to avoid. When there's a detour, you know exactly where you got to go. When there is somewhere where other people might be going in one direction, you know exactly where you need to go to. And in that way, it becomes easier, right, to reach paradise. And I ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitate and make easy for all of us to go to paradise, Ya Rabbil Alameen. But I want this to serve as a reminder for myself and then for all of you why it is important that you attend courses, classes, have some type of reading, some type of memorization, some type of note-taking, some studying when it comes to your religion. That you don't relegate it to social media, that you don't simply relegate it to be simply like a DIY project where it's pitched and patched here and there. Like I heard something on this little WhatsApp group, my Habarier, she sent me a message, and then somebody sent me this, or I remember one time I heard a long time ago, and then that is the sum total of your Islam and your deen. But then when it comes to your secular studies, you're studying for your ACTs, you're studying for your SATs, you're putting in work, midterms, finals, and you're putting in hours and hours and pouring over, studying and learning, right? Sometimes it might be even be a subject that you ain't, once you pass it, once you get through that class, you might never look back at that subject again. Am I lying? Don't do that. Anybody here who's gone to college, high school, you know, there's some classes where you're like, I don't even remember what it's almost like I never even took the class, but it was required, right? And imagine how much time and effort is invested in that versus the time and effort invested in you wanting to, trying to get to paradise, right? That always needs to be there. And if that is somehow, some way present in your life where you are studying, where you are learning, and not only that, the opposite, وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ, and don't cooperate with one another upon sin, al-ithm, things that are sinful in and of themselves, wal-udwan, which means to be excessive and to transgress and cross boundaries, and then wattaqullah, and be mindful and fearful and cognizant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because indeed he is severe in his punishment. In Allah shadid al-iqab. And so he gives us a number of different reflections and principles for us to understand and be aware of, and that they are very, very important. From them was what is the definition of a bir and taqwa, and the interplay and the relationship between these two words when they come together in the Quran or in the Sunnah or in Islamic writings, right? And then also, what do they mean when they are separate? When you see simply the word bir by itself or the word taqwa, right? And he mentioned that that's like a principle to understand that there are terms that come together oftentimes in the Quran, in the Sunnah, where they come together as a pair. And when they come together, they have distinct and individual separate meanings. And that when they come by themselves, those terms, then they entail and include the other word. So al-bir, when it's mentioned by itself, it includes the concepts and the ideas and the meaning of the word taqwa. And then when it's mentioned together with the word taqwa, like in this ayah, then it has a distinct and separate meaning. And then he mentioned several different examples, right? Miskeen and faqir, Islam and Iman. And he mentioned a number of different examples where that concept and that principle applies. And that is an important concept to understand, because if you don't, right, then what will inevitably and eventually happen is that it will cause you to have misunderstandings when it comes to the Sharia and Islam in general, and especially when it comes to the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when it comes to his boundaries, whether something is halal or whether something is haram, and mixing those things up, where something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended to be haram, for example, right? And then people excluding things from it, like alcohol, for example. That generally is the term khamr. And because people don't understand, right, about certain principles related to terms that are in the Quran and the Sunnah, that when you don't understand them, somebody says, well, khamr is haram, and khalas, that just means alcohol. So that means things like marijuana, that means things like fentanyl, that thing like LSD, shrooms, whatever, different types of drugs. Oh, those don't count because they're not called, that's not khamr. But that means somebody doesn't understand the terms that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the Quran, and certain principles, along with the one that we mentioned. When terms are mentioned together, then they have distinct meanings. And then when they're separate, they entail one another. Principles like that are extremely, extremely important. So the sum of that is that, in general, knowledge of the religion, knowledge of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is important. It is something that should be, as Muslims, we should all be lifelong learners. Just consider it like that. You should all of us should be lifelong learners. What you learned in Duxie at that time, that was for Duxie. Then when you got older, then there are certain things that you needed to know. And then the further you move along in life, there's other things that you need to know that Duxie wouldn't have sufficed you. It wasn't enough then, right? For you later on. So knowledge in general. And then specifically, he mentions different principles that he talks about that are, I don't want to go over all of them again, but that he's saying that especially when it comes to terms and terminology, right, in the Quran and the Sunnah, that is especially important to understand. When you do not, it will inevitably lead to confusion, misunderstandings, and things that are by Allah and His Messenger considered haram, we consider them halal because we didn't understand certain terms in the Quran and the Sunnah. Or the opposite, something that is halal, you might come and tell somebody, oh no, sister, that's haram. Or no, brother, that's haram. But in reality, in Islam, it's allowed, right? And that, of course, the sum total of that is specifically understanding the Quran. All of it is that how important it is to have a relationship with the Quran and understand the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in having a relationship, in learning it, studying it, understanding it, of course, you will then have a more wholesome practice, a more holistic practice and implementation of Islam in your life. Tayyib. And then he went into more specifics about al-ithm wal-udwan. The term ithim in and of itself, it means something, is haram in and of itself, right? That's considered ithim. And Allah speaks about it in a certain way in the Quran, i.e., every time something is considered ithim or haram in and of itself, like zina, like stealing, like killing, like lying, Allah says, don't go anywhere near it. He says, La taqrabu zina, don't go anywhere near it. Right? That's ithim, sins. And then udwan, right, are things that essentially they are not haram in and of themselves, but in excess, yani doing too much of that thing, then you are crossing a boundary and going over into haram. That's what udwan is, right? And so when those two terms are mentioned together, وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ, one means don't do these things that are haram, don't work with each other on sinning and transgressing, sinning against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and don't also cooperate and work with one another on transgressing against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. crossing boundaries, right? That's ithim and udwan. And then al-bir and taqwa. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Yeah, so we got to page, essentially, I want to say 13. So one of the last things that I wanted to mention before we move on, I think we're at where it says the two obligations. The last thing I wanted to mention is about some things that I missed out about the understanding of the meaning of the two words, al-bir and al-taqwa. So one of the definitions that Imam Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he mentions is that essentially al-bir and taqwa, bir is every type of righteous action, yeah? And he called that's the goal. That's what everybody should be trying to reach and attempt to do. That you are trying to reach al-bir, right? In your relationship with your family, your wife, your children, your work, your school, your neighbors, when you go to the park, when you're at the store, when you're doing work, whatever it is, right? That you are doing the best of actions and that you're doing good deeds in all of these different areas and arenas of your life. He says that's the goal that every human being, every Muslim, every mu'min should be trying to reach. That's the goal, al-bir, right? The action, righteous actions. And then at-taqwa, which is that God consciousness, that awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being mindful, being fearful, loving Him and being aware of Him, that is the means that will drive you to that goal. Men have an aura too. Like, brother, that's like, and he said, brother, that's none of your business, akhi. Why are you worried about what I'm dressing? Why are you looking at us anyways? Huh? And then they be like, nah, brother, let's just play, let's hoop, khalas, and then you go on your way, I'll go on my way. Why it's got to be more than that? But but the Prophet ﷺ is saying the essence of this religion, the essence of Islam is that if I have people in my proximity, the basis of my relationship, I got to be able to do that. But also vice versa, you should be doing that for me. Because why? Because you care about me. You care about, in the ultimate sense, whether I'm going to be burning forever in the hellfire, in the clearest of terms, and vice versa. I care the same for you. I care for your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, does that mean you beat somebody over the head with that? No. Right? Obviously, when it comes to genuine, sincere, loving, caring, transparent advice, it's not about you obeying what I tell you. It's not about you listening to me. It's about, right, you hearing what's right, but then also that I make every attempt to do it in the best way. I make every attempt to do it in a way that if I was being told the exact same thing, that I would be likely to listen and accept what I'm hearing. So where you're doing it, how you're saying it, what you say, that it's based on the Quran and the Sunnah. That way you're removing yourself out of the equation, that if they do argue, they do disagree or whatever, listen, I'm not just simply telling you my opinion. I care about you, but I'm telling you because this is what Allah and His Messenger said. And if you know something different, if you know another hadith, if you know a different ayah, please let me know. But otherwise, you ain't arguing with me. You arguing with Allah and His Messenger. I'm just sharing with you what I learned. So if you know something different, please, I would like to learn it too. But I'm only telling you this because I care about you. That's it. And this is what essentially what ta'awunu 'ala al-birri wa taqwa is. Now, and so he says, but you can't fulfill that though. He's saying you cannot fulfill that. A person can't fulfill the first obligation unless he associates with the people sincerely, offering them advice, kindness, and care. Likewise, a person cannot fulfill the second obligation, right, which is the obligation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, unless he prevents all created things from intruding between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He should do this for Allah's sake with sincerity, love, and adoration. Right? These subtle rules must be well understood, otherwise faults will arise in fulfilling these two obligations in terms of either knowledge, right, or practice. And what he essentially is alluding to, or what he means by these subtle rules must be understood, two words. They can be summarized in two words. These subtle rules that you have to understand. Number one, the first rule is selflessness. Selflessness. The second rule is sincerity. Yani ikhlas. The first one is what? Selflessness. When you're dealing with the people. Because right, when I tell somebody something, when I advise something, when I'm sharing with somebody, etc., trying to do all of this and maintain relationships with other people, I have to remove myself from the equation. And that is not always the easiest thing to do. And then also that when it comes to my dealing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I have to remove the creation from the equation. And it's just between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what it's mean by sincerity. And then the Shaykh, because we're going to talk about this a little bit more, this selflessness and this sincerity is encapsulated in a statement by a Shaykh by the name of Abdul-Qadir al-Jilani, very notable luminary in Islam. Says this is the meaning of what Shaykh Abdul-Qadir al-Jilani, may Allah bless his soul, said. يعني كن مع الحق بلا خلق ومع الخلق بلا نفس ومن لم يكن كذلك لم يزل في تخبيط ولم يزل أمره فرطا. And before I read or translate the statement, I want to say who is Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. His name is Abdul Qadir ibn Abdullah al-Jilani. He's died in the Hijri year 561. He was born in Jil, which is in a district in Central Asia, and he eventually or later on died in Baghdad. He was a well-known scholar and teacher. Most notably, he was the teacher of Ibn Qudama, rahimahullah, very famous, notable Hanbali scholar, right? The author of Al-Mughni. And also, you'll find oftentimes him being quoted by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and Imam Ibn Al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, like right now, right? However, with that being said, there is a Sufi order or tariqah, which is attributed to him, which he has nothing to do with, but it is falsely attributed to him, as well as excessive Sufi statements. And this little brief bio of him is in Sir al-A'lam al-Nubala by Imam Ad-Dhahabi. But at any rate, he said what? He said, in your relationship with Al-Haq. And who is Al-Haq? Ya Jama'ah, who is Al-Haq? Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That he's the truth, the epitome of the truth, the ultimate truth. He says, in your relationship with Al-Haq, let there be no creation. In your relationship with Allah, in between, there is no creation. He said, don't let there be any creation. And he says, and in your relationship with the people, let there be no part for yourself. And that's where we get that term selflessness. Right? And he said, let there be no part for yourself. And a person who does not do this will be in continuous confusion, and his affairs will always be at a loss. So how do we get to that? How do we get to that? And like we said, that is through selflessness, right? And which is getting rid of your ego when it comes to your relationship with people. That in general, when you deal with the people, that you are giving, the basis of it is that you are giving them their rights, and you are not necessarily dealing with them because you're expecting your rights. Now, I don't want it to be confused. It doesn't mean you don't demand or ask for your rights, but that's not the basis of your dealing with people. The base of you dealing with them, you remove yourself from the equation. So I do what I'm supposed to, and I give them their rights, even if they're not necessarily doing what they're supposed to be doing, and I'm not getting my rights. So, for example, a husband with his wife. She's righteous or not. She's doing what she's supposed to or not. The husband is supposed to honor and respect her rights and do what is his responsibility, irregardless if she's doing her responsibility or not. Does that mean he doesn't ask for his rights? Hasha lillah. No, he should ask for it, but he can't say, well, I'm not going to do what I'm supposed to do because she's not doing what she's supposed to do. First of all, just think about that. If you come on Yawm al-Qiyamah, every time when I hear somebody talk like, well, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Especially when it comes to like counseling and stuff. I tell them, just think about, I want you to say that and just imagine you in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Are you going to tell Allah you didn't do what Allah told you to do because somebody else is not doing what they're supposed to be doing? Right? And then we know the answer. That's obvious. No, you're not going to say that to Allah. But then what I'm supposed to do then? They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. What I'm supposed to do? Yes, you are supposed to ask for your rights, especially in a relationship like that, because it affects everything else. It's going to affect your children, right? If the roles are reversed and now the husband is not getting his rights. So he's not even asking necessarily for himself, but for the system, right, of the household, the children, right? For that greater purpose, he has to ask for his rights. But it's not the basis of, man, she better know who I am because I'm the man of the house. It's not because of that. It's because as a household, you know what I'm saying? How are we supposed to function as a unit together, as a family? How are we supposed to raise these kids? How am I supposed to teach my daughters what they're supposed to behave like and how they're supposed to conduct themselves? How am I supposed to teach my son how they're supposed to conduct themselves? Y'all understand? But the basis of it is not you getting your rights. Basis of you dealing with I'm giving her rights, irregardless. And vice versa. Imagine now, she's supposed to be doing the same thing. I'm giving my husband his rights, regardless of if he's doing what he's supposed to or not. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we all got to answer to who? We got to answer to Allah. So again, that's where you're removing yourself, and that's not easy. As a matter of fact, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, Imam Ibn Al-Qayyim, in another work that he has known as Madarij as-Salikin, which is the rank of the seekers, the ranks of the divine seekers, or the stations of the divine seekers. He describes the ego, your nafs, right? He describes it as being a mountain. All right? He describes it as being a mountain that you have to conquer. If you do not conquer it, i.e., if you don't climb that mountain and go on and reach its peak and then go to the other side, he said, this journey that we're going to be talking about, this spiritual journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he was like, you're done already. If you can't conquer your nafs, i.e., this mountain, right? He said, you can't do it. Or you won't be able to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger and everything else that we talk about, you're not going to be able to do it. The ego is a mountain that must be conquered. You have to climb it. Initially, it will seem difficult. It will only seem difficult. And it will be challenging in the beginning. And especially because shaitan, right? Your nafs is the mountain. Shaitan is at the peak of the mountain. And he's yelling down at the mountain as you're trying to climb up. Don't do it. Go back. It's too hard. There's another mountain after this. There's a long valley that you have to traverse. Go back. It's not even worth it. It's too hard. And Imam Ibn Al-Qayyim, he says, most people, they turn back. He said, most people, except for those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mercy on, most people, they turn away. He said, but once they reach the peak of the, and excuse me, and the closer they get to the peak, the louder and more shaitan screams. He'll tell you, you've gotten this far, you know what I'm saying? You don't know what's on the other side. You're not going to be able to make it. He said, but once you reach the peak, he says, everything else after that, you realize is easy. And he said, you'll see there are oases on the journey that you have to take anyways. And there are pit stops where you can take rest, reprieve, relief, etc. And how wide and spacious that path is. But you won't realize and see that unless you climb that mountain and reach the peak. Once you reach the peak, then you'll see everything. He says it only gets easier. So how do we do that? There are a few things. Essentially, is muhasibatun nafs, is you taking self-account, which of course requires you, and also being self-aware. What are your triggers? What are things that makes you slip and fall and regress and go back to the stuff that you used to do, or the habits you used to have, or maybe it's people that you used to be around, or maybe it's places that you go to, but you need to be self-aware. And then you need to take account of yourself. And there's a famous quote by Imam, by Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, wherein he said, "Hasabu anfusakum qabla an tuhasabu." Audit yourself, self-account. All right, take an accounting and take stock of yourself before there is an audit done for you. Right? Do it for yourself first. And when is that audit going to be? And that taking account, when did it be done for you? The day of judgment, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, when your deeds are being looked at, when they're being weighed, when there's a scale, when books are being brought, when, you know what I'm saying, when witnesses are being brought forward for you. Hasabu anfusakum. But so do it for yourself now, so that you don't have to worry about that later. And then of course you have the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us exactly this. That goes really well with that analogy about the nafs being a mountain. And that, but once you reach it, the top of it, that you will, everything else will get easier. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. That those who strive and they struggle, which no doubt we got to strive and struggle against our nafs. It's not always easy, right? It's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. That's why he describes it, right? So that you, when you look at it, it's like a mountain. But those who put forth that effort and they struggle and they push themselves and they have self-discipline and exercise self-restraint, right? وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? That لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. He promises that he will guide you to his path. But you got to do what first? You got to strive and struggle first. And if you put forth that effort, Allah promises that he'll guide you, i.e. that it'll get easier. Now, طيب. And so that is with the nafs. And so essentially we have here what? Selflessness, that you need to, when you deal with people, you need to deal with people in such a way that you are removing yourself from the equation. And I think this is good, best encapsulated in Surah Al-Insan. وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا إِنَّا نَخَافُ مِنْ رَبِّنَا يَوْمًا عَبُوسًا قَمْطَرِيرًا فَوَّقَاهُمُ اللَّهُ شَرَّ ذَلِكَ الْيَوْمِ وَلَقَاهُمْ نَضْرَةً وَسُرُورًا. So look, it says that Allah is describing a certain type of people, right? And their dealings with other people. And they're different categories of people, right? وَيُطْعِمُونَ طَعَامًا. And they feed people and they give them food, right? عَلَى حُبِّهِ. Even though they love it themselves, they might need it for themselves. And preferring others over themselves. Remember, like we said, the rights for them. And thinking about them. And preferring them. Miskinan. those who are poor, yatiman, the orphans, wa asira, and even the prisoners of war, right? And what are they thinking? Because Ibn Abbas, he says they don't, the next part of this next ayah, they don't say that out loud to people to their face, but they think that in their minds and in their hearts. إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. We are feeding you simply seeking the countenance and the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً. We don't want any type of reward or compensation from you. وَلَا شُكُورًا. I don't even need you to say thank you. I don't need nothing from you. Why? Because ultimately, I'm doing this, right, for you, and I'm not thinking about the compensation I'm going to get in this life for myself. But ultimately, I'm thinking about my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? I'm doing this good deed, this act of work for between them, with nothing from them, and I'm only between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Selflessness and sincerity. So now we move on, inshallah, to chapter 2, migration to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by Shaykh, he goes on, undertaking the journey. As the caravan of Hijrah sets off, the traveler to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enters into a foreign land, parting with the habits and customs of his homeland. This allows him to ponder carefully over his situation, seeking that which is most vital in his journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the extent that it deserves his life's pursuance. And so right now, what he's trying to do is get us to conceptualize that we are on a journey in this life, right? This hijrah that he's talking about. And everything that he mentioned before, right, was simply an introduction and a preparation for us to come to him talking about this journey. And when you're on this journey, you're in a foreign land, you're away from family, from the local spots that you know, your friends, etc., all the things that you normally have, you are on a journey. And essentially what he wants us to understand is that this life, you are simply a traveler. This entire life, this is not your ultimate home. As the Prophet ﷺ, as he mentioned to Abdullah ibn Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, right, he told him, kun fi dunya ka'annaka gharib aw abir as-sabil. He said, be in this world as if you are a traveler, right? As he's telling us right now, right? That we're on a journey. We're traveling and we're away from home. We're away from family. We're away from friends, habits, customs, all of that. We're in a strange land. We don't know the people. They don't know us. Prophet ﷺ, he said, be just like that when you're in this life. Oh, abid as-sabil, or someone who's simply passing by. And I want to ask you real quick, what is the difference between a traveler and someone who's simply passing by? What's the difference? Yes. Yeah. So a traveler, you might be, right? You might go somewhere for a few days, a few weeks, maybe even some months. That's not your home. That's not your place. That's not where you reside. You're still, but you're still a traveler, right? Or abid as-sabil, you don't even stop there. You stop, maybe get some gas, buy some coffee, right? Some Red Bull, and you keep it pushing. That's it. You just simply pass through. But this is how we're supposed to understand this life. This is not our ultimate home. Matter of fact, we're simply here as a consequence, right? Because of our father Adam alayhi salam, right? Eating from the tree, right? So this is not our home. Where is our ultimate abode? Where's the home? We're just traveling, right? We're just here for a little bit. Where do we ultimately, the home of Ibn Adam? Jannah. This is what the Shaykh, he wants you to get you to understand. Don't get comfortable here. And he goes on to say what? That this is, something that is your life's pursuance. And it means that you're going to do what? You're seeking that which is most vital in your journey. I.e., if you have that understanding, it gives you perspective. And it starts giving you perspective in your life about what is most important. What do I really need in this life? And what could I do without? It's extra. It's excess. It's not going to help me get to Jannah, right? Because the alternative, typically, when you hear non-Muslims or you hear people who don't have this perspective, they'll say what? You only live once. And so what happens? They try to get as much as they can And they're trying to get as much of the bag as they can. And they're trying to get as much of the dunya as they can. They're trying to get as much likes as they can. And they're trying to get as much property. And they're trying, like everything, it's all material. Why? Because you only live once. So this is their ultimate home in their minds. But as for us, like, man, I'm just here for, you know what I'm saying, a little bit, few years. Plus, after that, though, man, I'm going to my real home. That's where I'm on my way to. And he says that gives you that perspective. So then when you look at what do you need provisions for your travel, because you need stuff when you're traveling. Now you start looking at things with that eye. All right, I really need this. I need good companions. I need good friends. I need Iman in my life. I need to be with the Muslims because that's helping me on my journey. And this stuff that's not helping with my journey, it looks cool. People seem on the commercial, they look like they laughing, living it up, and they enjoying themselves. I see people, but that's not helping me on my journey. So I'm good. I don't need it, even if it looks enjoyable, because it's going to obstruct me from my journey. He says, the one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in whose hands is guidance, reveals to him that his most important goal must be migration to Allah and his messenger. This migration is a continual obligation. It's a continual obligation upon every individual, and no one is exempt from it. And it is the act that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires and demands from all people, right? And then we're going to stop here. But essentially what he's about to talk about is that there are two kinds of hijrah. One of them may or may not be a requirement on you, which is the physical hijrah. That may or may not be a requirement. So for some people, it's wajib. They gotta leave. They can't stay here. There are some people like that. And there are some people, it's not wajib, right? And that's talked about in fiqh. He says, but in this book, we're not talking about that hijrah. We'll talk about it next week, inshallah, because obviously it's very pertinent for us living here in America. But the real hijrah, the one that is an obligation on everybody at all times, every moment in their life, nobody gets away from it, is the migration of the heart to Allah and his messenger. For all of us, that is a constant requirement. And he goes on to discuss and talk about how so many people, sometimes even scholars, become bogged down in discussing, debating, talking about, and knowing all of the different rulings related to that physical hijrah, even though it may not be a requirement on you. It's like somebody knowing all the details about zakat and they're broke. He says, but this other thing is a requirement all the time, like salah. Whether you got money or you don't got, you still got to pray. Everybody, all of us got to pray. You got money or you don't, right? He's saying that hijrah to Allah and his messenger with your heart, you always have to make that, which is why he made that the theme, the topic of this book. So I know we got to pray now, so we'll stop here, inshallah. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wa akhir da'wan alhamdulillah rabbil alamin.